Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Congratulations on surviving April Fools. All your H's are safe.
Ha ha. Later in the show, we'll be joined by State Senator for Amden, Hampshire, and Worcester counties. Ha 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 ha. Jake Olivera. We've got a chance to talk with him for a little while during the March for the Food Bank, but now we'll get to see him in his regular clothes, even though we're on the radio, and talk about his regular work for the community. Right now, however, a local opportunity to learn through mediums you might not have expected that you can participate in this weekend.
This Friday and Saturday, April 5th and 6th, at Bombyx Center for Arts and Equity in Florence, the third annual Power of Truths Festival presented by Self-Evident Education with an assist from the excellent Northampton Arts Council.
And
those guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
No, it's okay. Talk about. And joining us is Michael Lawrence Riddell, our Executive Director of Self-Evident Education, an author, educator, organizer, and one of our go-to historians from Clark University,
Yes.
Professor Dr. Usman Power Green. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Dr. Power Green has been on our show many times talking about various aspects of history, but the two of you guys for many years have been working on self-evident education and its outgrowth, this festival, the Power of Truths Festival. First off, tell us about the birth of self-evident education. Mr. LR, former school teacher.
Yes, sir. So, I spent about 20 years in the public school classroom teaching high school, elementary school, middle school, and I became a teacher because I saw education as a space where I could exert pressure on systemic racism and white supremacy. I saw education as a powerful lever in the fight to eradicate those issues from our society, and I saw the power that education had on me in understanding the ways that race has and does function in our world, right? And so that's why I became an educator. And
I think worth noting for radio listeners, you're white.
I am a white dude. Accurate. 100%. And my beard is also white. And so from a young age, I really educated myself and really tried to understand the ways that race has and does function. I was blessed to be educated in a way where I learned a lot about the ways that race works in our country. I was unfortunate to witness some moments of racial violence and racial hatred that really opened my eyes to the ways that racism still was alive and breathing and insidious, in the North. I think I grew up getting that kind of, underlying message that racism, happened back then and down there, So it really sent me on this mission, and I became an educator. My final time in the classroom, I was teaching American history to 8th graders, and I really wanted to present history to them in a way that would help them to see the ways that systems of power had been constructed in our country, because if you understand how something is constructed, you can think about how to deconstruct it, right? And I knew that storytelling was the key, right? If I could use storytelling to really get students to enter into the mindset of what these moments in history were about. And on top of that, if I could use multimedia storytelling to do it, I knew I was going to grab them and get them interested, and we could dig deeper and go deeper. In the English classroom, I really marveled at the power of a well-told story to get people to talk about complex, deep, controversial, quote-unquote, hard topics. And so I wanted to do the same thing in my history class. And I just assumed, because I saw so clearly the kinds of resources I wanted for my students, that they existed in the world, and it would be easy for me to find them. And then I didn't find them, and so I started making them myself. And over the years of our friendship and professional relationship, Usman and I have spent a ton of time talking about the power of history, about how to translate that power to people. And so when I started working on this project of making these documentary films about moments in our history, Usman was one of the first people that I turned to talk out the idea, to think about, what are some of the stories that we're going to tell. So he's been an absolutely invaluable colleague in doing this work. And now we've got a library of 10 documentary films, and we're producing films for the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And, we're working with teachers all across the country.
all this based in Northampton, which is really great.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Right, Western Mass.
I want to make a terrible joke about it's a terrible joke. It's just like, but,
I like
not,
terrible
but not in
jokes.
Florida, right?
Talk about that. I mean, like, were you experiencing that as an educator in the North, the pushback on trying to teach these quote-unquote hard topics?
Yeah, not a ton here in my own experience. I have heard stories, of teachers in Northampton being sort of anonymously called out for critical race theorying in their classroom. But, to that, speaking about Florida and not just Florida, Georgia, other places where we work, we've done a bunch of work in Georgia. And in fact, I screened one of our films in Tennessee at the end of last year. And one of the women in the audience was a teacher from Georgia. And at the end of the film, she stood up and she was like, brilliant. Here are all of the things that, made that such a phenomenally powerful story. It was our film about William and Ellen Craft called If You Cross This Boundary, We All Die. And then she said, but I wouldn't be able to show that where I teach because it would be considered divisive content.
Right.
And if you think about, right, what we say our country is about, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if William and Ellen Craft's story is not a story about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I don't know what is, right? And so what makes it divisive? The fact that it's history about black people.
We also have a very divisive period in history called the Civil War, which literally divided the country. Will they say we can't teach the Civil War? They tell you how you can teach the Civil
Yes.
War, I'm sure.
Yep.
And that's part of what the self-evident...
The War of Northern Aggression.
Yeah, the War of Northern Aggression. That's part of what self-evident education is all about, who are
100%.
hosting the third annual Power of Truths Festival this Friday and Saturday in Northampton at Bombyx in Florence. And we're speaking with Executive Director of Self-Evident Education, Michael Lawrence Riddell, and historian, our go-to historian from Clark University, Dr. Usman Power Green. Usman, tell us what drew you to self-evident education and why, as a historian, you wanted to be a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of really exciting opportunities for educators, historians, and just people who want to understand history with self-evident education. I mean, what makes the film so powerful and the vision so powerful is that the vision has always been to encompass and engage as many people as possible, people who want to learn, right? So even if the films are designed specifically with teachers in mind, as a person who has been to screenings in the community, has screened them in my adult education course, the Clemente course in the humanities, the one in Springfield as well as the one in Holyoke, I know how powerful storytelling of the type that self-evident education is doing, how powerful it is in the community. And in many ways, it is an outgrowth of my interest in public engaged history. Right. And so rather than just assigning articles, sometimes you can assign multimedia, exciting, extraordinarily crafted films and then have the conversation after that. So that's what drew me to it. And also just, recognizing Michael's vision for it because, when we first began having conversations about it, it really did seem, how would one go about, being able to produce films, being able to actually get them out, distribute them. I mean, we were really at square one, how to make the films, how to get them to people. And so as a person who's been there since day one, it's been an incredible journey. And we're looking forward to the great films, which Michael can kind of maybe talk about briefly that are in the works, particularly the African American Museum, the Smithsonian. Being able to partner with them is a really extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah.
Did they ask for specific things for you to do films about, or did they kind of give you free rein for topics that you were interested in bringing to light?
It was a little bit of a combination of all of that. They had seen our work, and so they said, we want what you do, and give us some ideas, right? And so what we did was we looked through their collection of, they have a thing online called Learning Through Objects. And so we identified the objects that were in their collection, and we sort of sorted them into categories, and we thought, okay, here's a story that we're interested in telling that connects to the objects that they already have, and then we pitched them on a couple of different ideas, one of which was a film that we're going to premiere at the Power of Truths on Saturday night, 7:30, as part of Know the Ledge Hip Hop History Live. It's called Freedom's Battle at Christiana, and it's about a moment in 1851 where a group of abolitionists come together in Christiana, Pennsylvania. 20 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line, and they band together in response to an enslaver and a posse, including U.S. Marshals, who come to bring back 4 self-emancipated men into slavery. And it's this, armed resistance that, numerous historians have noted as sort of one of the linchpin moments that leads us eventually to the Civil War, right? And I think one of the things that it really does a great job of highlighting is the centrality of the agency of enslaved African Americans and African American abolitionists in their own freedom, right? I think so often, if you look at the Florida history standards, right, and you look at the ways that they're being presented by organizations like PragerU and other organizations like that, it's sort of highlighting the fact that, like, white people ended slavery, right? And it totally obscures. Yes, we need that, right? We need to see that vision, the ways in which there were white people who were agitating for universal liberty and humanity. But if we obscure the role of the agency of enslaved people and free African Americans in ending the institution of slavery, then we continue to perpetuate these half-truths and these mythologies that are harmful.
Yeah.
And we happen to live in a place where we have 2 of the most prominent black abolitionists, David Ruggles and Sojourner Truth, who very much are people who inspired the idea for the power of truths and the idea of truth-telling, be it multimedia, be it through historical works, fictional works, whatever it is. Just how do we engage in the truth about the past, and also the ways in which this past continues to resonate. And so it is no coincidence that we will be at the Bombeck Center, across from the Sojourner Truth statue, down the block from the David Ruggles Center, and engaging hopefully people who are hearing this in some incredible educational and what KRS-One called edutainment.
Yeah,
I love
back
that.
in the day.
Yeah.
I love that hip hop history is a part of this year's program, in no small part because we just had the 50th anniversary of the impetus of hip hop, but also because hip hop as a genre of music is so underappreciated in how much it drives and has driven the last 30 to 35 years of popular culture in America. Yep. Why was it important to bring? I mean, I assume that the anniversary had something to do with it, but why else bring that into this weekend?
Yeah, so I think I've always been one who has learned through what some scholars call the cultural curriculum. Learning is done in a whole bunch of different spaces, places, and ways, and through different modes, right? In my classroom, I often presented students with an opportunity to express their learning in a multitude of ways. I had students, choreographing original dances as an analysis of A Midsummer Night's Dream, or, putting on a visual art display exhibit about the themes within of Mice and Men, right? So it was that kind of work of really expressing knowledge and learning through a multitude of ways. And hip hop for me has always been, I've sort of, gravitated towards political, conscious hip hop, KRS-One, Public Enemy, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. Like, that's where I sort of got my birth in hip hop. And so to me, the storytelling aspect of hip hop felt like this beautiful marriage with the kind of storytelling we're doing. We're doing this multimedia storytelling in our films. They've got music, they've got animations and illustrations and, historical primary source documents. They're all embedded and imbued with this sort of hip hop aesthetic that is sort of baked into our filmmaking. And so extending that to working with some of these brilliant people that we know who are storytellers, are hip hop artists. So, we've got people like Dutch Rebel, Acrobatic, Mr. Lift, the Perceptionists are going to be there on Saturday night as part of Know the Ledge Hip Hop History Live. And then folks, who aren't necessarily hip hop artists like Marcia Gomes, who's a singer-songwriter, but she understands the aesthetic and the sort of nature of the storytelling.
Also a teacher?
Also a teacher. That's how I know Marcia. So her piece, she embodies Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman in Know the Ledge Hip Hop History Live, and I mean, I still get chills when I think about her performance to this day. So I can't wait to see it again.
In about 4 seconds, a teacher will begin.
Coming up, a chat with State Senator Jake Olivera about his action-packed first year in office and more.
But next, some of the folks and activities you'll meet at the Power of Truths Festival this weekend at Bombyx. More with Michael Lawrence Riddell and Professor Usman Power Green.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We're continuing our conversation with Michael Lawrence Riddell of Self-Evident Education and Dr. Usman Power Green, two of the organizers of the Power of Truths Festival happening at Bombyx in Florence this Friday and Saturday.
Usman, tell us about the keynote speaker who's going to be there on Saturday afternoon, Tricia Rose.
Yeah, well, we're so excited that Tricia Rose agreed to join the conference this year for a variety of reasons. One is from the beginning of the planning of the conference, our goal was to bring academics, educators, activists, and artists together in one place for one conference, because some who are listening may be well aware that when you go to an educators conference, it's all educators, and which is great. I go to American Historical Association or the SALA, sort of Black Studies organizations. It's mostly scholars who do that, and so we believed that if we were to create something that brought a variety of people together, types together, that we'd have a new sense of synergy and excitement. From activists and intellectuals, and those who are fans of hip hop and who were around when people began to take hip hop seriously as a field of study will be aware Tricia knows classic Black noise and extraordinarily and singularly influential text and book exploring hip hop, and since then, Professor Rose has been at Brown University and has run an incredible institute there, and continues to write and has some new work coming out now, and so it's a tremendous opportunity. And everyone who's listening who is aware of her, please come listen to the keynote, stay for the conversation, and it's going to be an extraordinary opportunity for us to engage a great scholar, not necessarily just the 5 colleges or the other colleges, but straight up in the community. So we're really excited.
It's happening this weekend. Who are some of the other folks that you're excited about? We're going to have Khalif Neville on. He's doing an interactive, multimedia, virtual reality thing that I can't wait. He's going to bring it here so we can experience it. But what?
Fourth dimensional art.
I love that.
Incredible.
Tell us about some of the other folks that you're excited that are coming to the Power of Truth.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I mean, we have been fortunate, over the last 3 years, our third one, to continue to engage organizations in the community. I spoke last year about documenting the early history of Black lives. So Cliff McCarthy, who's on, Cliff will be on a panel for that. So, we get a chance to sort of update the broader community about the project and bring in new people. Folk who are associated with the Western Massachusetts Policy Center, Milan Clark, which is an anti-racist think tank centered on practical training, education, and direct resourcing for people who usually are excluded from power. Milan will be on a panel about democracy, which is going to be extraordinary. So the goal, as we mentioned, is really to highlight newer organizations, some organizations that, continue to do work, giving them an opportunity to share, updates and to engage a new audience of people who maybe don't know the work of local history work, as well as reparations. We have a panel that we're really excited about that's going to bring some commissioners and the Reparations Commission, as well as religious institutions that are doing this work. And so we're excited by, once again, this sort of diverse group of people who share one thing in common, and that is trying to understand the present and past and thinking about ways to get towards equity and equality for all different types of people. What else, Mike?
So a couple others. Malia Lazu, who's the founder and director of the Urban Labs program at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has a book that just came out called From Intention to Impact. So she's going to speak a little bit about the idea of Sankofa in political movements, right? Mm-hmm. So she's really focused in on the way...
What's Sankofa for people who don't know?
Yeah, so I mean, it's about the sort of circular nature of time, right? And it's represented by the Sankofa bird, so folks should look it up. But, the ways she's focusing on it is the ways in which political movements are constantly having to protect gains that have been made while simultaneously understanding the plight of the now so that they can build a just future, right? And so if we think about that in terms of what's happening in places like Florida and Georgia and other places like that right now, there's these gains that have been made, right, where people are more open and willing to talk honestly and accurately about the history of our country, but we're having to fight to keep those gains while we're also trying to analyze what's happening in the present so we can make a better future. So Malia is going to talk about that. If you want to hear more about the ways in which she thinks about Sankofa, come on out. One of Khalif's pieces is called Sankofa because the music loops on itself, right, in this constant circle of time and space. Acrobatic is going to do an interactive performance and lecture talking about the sort of political and social power of hip hop on its, 50th-ish birthday and his own place in that. And then on Saturday, the Northampton High School Wind Ensemble is going to play a number of different pieces of music by contemporary and historical Black composers. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
So much more.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to also talk about the Witness Stone Project. Based in Connecticut, has been sharing their work around. What the Witness Stone Project does is they put representations, which has been inspired from after the Holocaust in Germany, locations where Jewish people were deported. That project has grown up sort of here in New England and particularly in Connecticut, and so they're gonna be coming out and doing a presentation about their work because they've been collaborating with folk who are documenting the early history of Black lives. And so, we're really excited to invite them up and to share their vision. And I think people will be really excited to hear what they have to say about how we think about the past and how we engage audiences, right? Schools and communities that are predominantly white in this question about slavery in the past and trying to find constructive ways to engage it. And so we're really excited about them as well. So it's going to be a great lineup.
Wanted to make another terrible joke.
Go for it.
Yeah, I like terrible jokes.
Yeah.
They're the worst. No, it's doing this work and what you said about Black activism, especially the surprising backlash of having a Black president, and I think we're just underestimating how angry everyone else would be after that was over.
Yeah, I think in 20 years we'll understand that a lot better, but it's hard for us to see it right now.
Real mad about that. In similar vein, I think one of the beautiful things about this whole series is trying to look at, to put it kindly, troubled pasts and present, and try to present them in a way that is less confrontational than I think the majority of people think that they're going to get that information. Yeah. Do you find, either of you, when presenting work like this, that people are expecting it to be angrier and more blame pointing than just presenting that this happened?
Yeah, I think, speaking from my own personal work at Self-Evident, I think one of the things that we had at the core of our theory of change was this idea that everybody loves a good story. And if we tell a good story that makes you think new thoughts and think new questions and think in new ways, then we've done our job, right? That's what stories are meant to do. And so we're not coming in there blaming anybody. We're not pointing fingers. We're saying, look, this is all of our history, right? It's everybody's history. And so we all need to own it. And that in and of itself can connect us, right? We can connect. We don't have to all think and see exactly the same things, right? But if we can connect through our common humanity, that's at the root of what we're doing. And so I think doing that opens it up for conversations that people might not have thought they were ready for or knew that they were ready for. But I think art does that, right? I think that's one of the things that art can really do, is that art, comedy, whatever it is, that those are ways that we can deal with these topics that in other ways, might be too hard for people to talk about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as a teacher, as a person that's constantly engaged in communities, people, particularly, people of color, there's sort of sense that people are linear in their thinking. And actually, Black people have diverse thoughts and variety of thoughts. And so if you bring, it's like, oh my gosh, not everyone agrees.
Not a monolith.
Exactly. I'm like, not everyone agrees on everything. But what I said in class the other day, we had a great last session at the Care Center, the Clemente class I teach over there. And it was heated. It was great. It was heated. It was passionate. It was around issues around equity and social justice and people's political opinions. And at the moment came where it's getting really heated. And I said, if you care about equality, equity, justice, if you believe, we're talking about Declaration of Independence, sort of as we made a full circle, if you believe in the idea, of life, liberty, and that people should be able to pursue how they imagine happiness, we have more in common than you realize. We have a lot in when you start saying, I actually think that people shouldn't have rights. I actually think that some people should be treated differently based on race, gender, sexuality, whatever it is. We don't have a lot in common. But if we agree in the sort of founding principles, we actually have a tremendous amount in common. So the question is, how do we find our way together towards understanding either repairing the past or dealing with inequities now, right? How do we get there in a digital world where a lot of us say angry things on Facebook and a lot of us are shouting through the keyboard, being able to have an actual public space where we can come in and listen to some experts who've been spending a lot of time on these topics and share our opinion, listen to opinions. To me, it's the most essential way to do it, right, in terms of educating our society. So hopefully you guys will recognize it and come through, and we'll be able to be a part of a conversation that's happening anyway, by the way, which I always say it's just a question of whether it's going to be in an open and positive space, or if it's going to be, in back corners where people are just angry and railing. So,
and frankly, do you want those conversations to happen without you? Of course you don't. You want to be a part of them. So go be a part of the conversation.
That's
Please.
right. Even if you disagree, be a part of the conversation.
Yes.
And that conversation is happening this Friday and Saturday, April 5th and 6th at Bombyx in Florence, the third annual Power of Truths Festival presented by Self-Evident Education, whose executive director, Michael Lawrence Riddell, has been joining us, as well as from the Northampton Arts Council and a big part of Self-Evident Education. And this festival is our go-to historian from Clark University,
Yes.
Dr. Usman Power Green. Thank you both so much.
Yeah,
thanks for
thank
having
you. Visit bombyx.live for ticket information if you want to come out and join us, and please do.
Thank you all.
Thank you both.
Time to check in on Western Mass's interests on Beacon Hill and beyond with State Senator Jake Olivera.
That's next. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, helping customers make the switch to solar for savings, energy security, and tax incentives. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Senator Jake Olivera represents the residents of Hamden, Hampshire, and Worcester District, which includes Ludlow, Belchertown, Granby, Palmer, Warren, Hamden, South Hadley, Longmeadow, East Longmeadow, parts of Springfield, parts of Chicopee, and Wilbraham. Before being elected in 2022, Senator Olivera served as the state representative for the 7th Hamden District from his hometown in Ludlow.
Senator Olivera is a fourth-generation Ludlow resident. He is the great-grandson of immigrants from Portugal and Poland. Active in his community for nearly 2 decades, Jake was elected as a Ludlow precinct member at 18 and to the Ludlow School Committee at 22, where he served for 12 years.
Prior to being elected to the Massachusetts House, Senator Jake Olivera worked for over a decade in government relations for the 9 Massachusetts state universities, and earlier in his career, he worked as a legislative director for State Representative Michael Rodriguez. The state senator is also a big NPR fan, I found out when we hung out a little bit on the March for the Food Bank.
It's safe to say I'm a full-on NPR nerd, Monty.
Well, we're going to get to that for sure a little bit later in the show, but let's start with legislative stuff there, Senator.
Very first, you're a year into your tenure. We'll talk about 2-year terms hopefully later, but how do you feel the first year went?
I think, the first 15 months has gone pretty well so far. Having the experience of being a House member beforehand, doing 2 years, I'm a perpetual freshman now in the legislature, so I was a freshman in the House for 1 term. I actually gave my first speech on the House floor was my goodbye speech, which is kind of interesting to have. I didn't wait as long on the Senate side as it's a smaller chamber, smaller body, but my first speech that I gave was actually around this time last year, around the budget for FY24 regarding our support for our public libraries. Nice. And sometimes you never know which direction your path is going to take you of your interests. Having a background in public education, I thought I was going to be K through 12 education, public higher education all the time. And then you find yourself, falling into other policy areas because of the experiences of your constituents, but also what you're seeing on the ground, talking to the roughly 170,000 people that I represent in the 12 communities in my district.
You, as we've mentioned, were a representative in the House of Representatives on Beacon Hill and now are a state senator. You hold the seat previously held by Senator Eric Lesser, who ran for lieutenant governor. in my estimation, contrary to what you might see on the federal level, the House of Representatives in Massachusetts is a strong and powerful legislative body, and the Senate is a smaller body, but maybe doesn't have the same clout, reputation, power as the House of Representatives. What made you want to make that jump from the House of Representatives to the state Senate?
Well, a couple of things. First off, on the Senate side, the power dynamic is kind of equal. When you look at members of the Senate, because a lot of our business that we do in the legislature is done through the committee process, and there's a collection of committees. You can sit on the House side and be there for several terms and not have a committee chairmanship if you are waiting long enough for it. On the Senate side, because there's so few members, each member of the Democratic caucus either chairs a committee or is in leadership, which means you automatically have say in policy decisions right away that are before your committee. And so with, now sitting on 7 committees in the legislature, chairing one of them and vice chair of 2 other committees, really a lot of that work is done. Each legislative session, we have 7,000 bills that are filed. Obviously, those 7,000 bills can't all go directly to the floor of the House and Senate. It would be absolute chaos. So a lot of the work that we do in the legislature is done through the committee process. And unlike the federal level, where there are separate committees for the House and separate committees for the Senate, most of the committees are run through a joint committee process. So I have a co-chair of the committee that I chair on the Senate side, and we work together to try to move legislation forward. And so the other kind of difference between the House and the Senate is also where the leadership is from. A lot of work that you're doing is working with the leaders of your party or the leaders of the institution. On the Senate side, our leadership is actually a lot more focused outside of the 128 bubble. So the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, who was in Western Mass and Ludlow last night with me, State Senator Mike Rodrigues, he's from the South Coast area that has a lot of similar issues that Western Mass faces. Our Senate president is State Senate President Karen Spilka from Metro West, which is outside of the Boston area. So I think members of the Senate, not to say that the House doesn't, there's a lot more of a recognition of things outside of 128. And you have a pretty sympathetic ear when you're fighting and advocating for the 413 there.
We're speaking with State Senator Jake Olivera. One of the bills that I know our news department is very interested in that you have signed on to recently is legislation to protect survivors of spousal abuse from alimony liability. Tell us about what brought that to your attention, why that was a bill that you wanted to support.
Well, this issue is really personal for me. And when you look at survivors of domestic violence, you look towards other states and what they're doing to protect survivors of domestic violence. So just south of the border from us, the state of Connecticut passed legislation and signed into law by Governor Lamont and went into effect this January that prohibited the re-victimization of survivors of domestic violence from having to pay alimony to their former spouse. I think it's fairly safe to say that many of the survivors of domestic violence tend to be women. And for a lot of our history, women tended to earn a lot less than men did. And so there was really never that change in our laws where we want to keep up with it. So California, New Jersey, Connecticut have prevented that re-victimization by passing into law a prevention from a spouse, someone who has been victimized by domestic violence, from having to be re-victimized all over again by paying alimony to someone that physically violated them. To me, that's unconscionable today. And so that legislation that I'm working on, it was filed as a late file. We're hoping to move that this session, but if not, I will refile it next session, working with some of the advocates like Jane Doe, the YWCAs, and other advocacy groups are important because a lot of people don't really want to talk about this, and they kind of go into the shadows. We want to make sure that our legislature, our Commonwealth is a safe space, and for people that have been victimized, that our laws catch up with it. There's more work to be done. It's not perfect yet, and this is just one step in order to prevent that re-victimization.
Did they come to you, those organizations, Jane Doe and the YWCA?
I actually went to them.
Really?
So for me, this is personal, and someone that I know, someone that I was close with that has been impacted by this and is going through the criminal justice system and the process for domestic violence, brought this issue to my attention, and I plan to move it forward and fight vigorously this session, and if it doesn't get passed next session, to make sure this comes into law.
I want to talk about one of two things that I was curious about that kind of tie into this. You're one of the few senators that rent. So your opinion on the housing crisis in this area, especially with your appearance and connecting with that trailer park in Ludlow where they just had the 150% rent hike, which
even more than that
makes
for some
me
people.
cringe so much. I only just stopped renting, and I can't even imagine.
Yeah, as one of the few renters in the legislature, there's actually more in the Senate side than you would think. And there's actually several of us, including, my partner here for the city of Springfield, Senator Gomez as well. So I think we add a little bit of a different perspective to the housing crisis that we're facing. And it's not just the ability to buy a home right now, it's the ability to afford these rising rent increases that we see across the board. And so, for me as a member of the Senate that actually has this perspective, adding it saying that people that are renting are facing this crisis even greater right now than anything else. With rising rent rates, you look at the city of Springfield here, and a majority of people in the city of Springfield rent. And if you want to afford the median rent here in the city of Springfield, you need to earn 130% above the median family income. And so those rising rent rates are outpacing inflation. They're also driving housing insecurity up. There isn't a day or a week that goes by and one of our offices isn't contacted by a constituent who's facing, housing insecurity. But when you look at the variety of housing options that we have in Massachusetts, whether it's rental properties, single-family homes, multifamily homes, but including our mobile homes and our mobile parks, there really isn't anything to stop these outrageous increases for people who might own their own trailer like they do in Ludlow in the mobile home park, but don't own the property that it sits on. And a landlord can come in and do some cosmetic repairs and then jack up the value or the rate of that property to the extent where it prices people off. We had in the park that you were mentioning, right on the corner of West Street in Ludlow, there were residents there that were paying a little bit over $200 a month for their rental fee to be in that property, and it spiked pretty much overnight to over $500. And think about that. Seeing that percentage of an increase, $300 going up for basic cosmetic repairs to the property, including a putting in of a little picket fence. And we're not talking a luxury, facility here where you have a swimming pool, clubhouse, meeting facilities. They don't even have, the ability to have their own mailboxes there that's on the side. So, I don't think when you talk to those residents, all of them understand that there's rising costs and they're willing to pay that, but a $300 increase per a month on their rental rates there is just unconscionable. And we want to make sure we protect those residents as well. We've been in contact with the Consumer Protection Division over at the Attorney General's office and working with the housing advocates and attorneys to push back against these increases. And it's important to point out as well that the owner of this property, who's buying a lot of properties throughout Massachusetts, actually runs seminars right now where he advertises that it's like insider trading but legal. To me, that is just cringeworthy and has no place here in the Commonwealth. And so working with my colleagues in the House, State Representative Aaron Saunders as well, we're trying to push back against these increases as a consumer protection issue.
We're speaking with State Senator Jake Olivera. So let's stick with housing for a minute here. We know that Massachusetts is a right-to-shelter state, that there is a housing crisis writ large. There is a migrant crisis on top of that. Where do you stand on right to shelter as a state law? Should that remain, or is this something that needs to be changed, in your opinion?
Well, when you look at nationwide and you look at cities, so if you read the New York Times this weekend, there was an article that showed about the homeless crisis in Los Angeles. And Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, put in place a program to get people off the streets. And that is a version of their emergency shelter system, similar to what we have in Massachusetts. We don't want people living out on the streets. We don't want people in tent encampments. We don't want people living on the sidewalks or on park benches. So the emergency shelter system is so important, but it's also important to point out that these are families. These are women and children that need housing. And with our housing crisis right now and crunch, this emergency shelter system is the only stopgap measure to prevent people from actually living on the streets right now. And so while it's not perfect and there needs to be reforms done to it, because paying, someone to live in a motel or a hotel for months on end isn't financially prudent or respectful as well, we need to find permanent housing, and we also need to help people get to self-sufficiency. When you look at the emergency shelter system, about 50% are not migrants or people that have come from another country. Those are Massachusetts residents. Those are our friends. Those are our neighbors. Those are people that have been here for decades. But the migrant crisis, having met with so many people who have escaped extraordinary situations. I met with immigrants that immigrated here from Afghanistan, from Haiti, and the crisis that's going there. These people deserve to live with dignity, and our emergency shelter system is important, but it's also on the federal government. And they have a responsibility here, especially for the migrants, to help out. These people are desperate to work and not getting work permits from the federal government right now because the former president, as the leader of his party, told his senators and congressmen that subscribe to his nonsense to vote against a comprehensive immigration package. That is not respectful for what we are doing and trying to do for families that came here in situations that were so dire. They want to work. They want to move towards self-sufficiency, yet we don't have a partner in the federal government because of the former president right now blocking comprehensive immigration reform in Washington, D.C. But we as legislators here in Massachusetts, it's now on our plate to step it up, and we're going to do everything in our power that we can do to help these people get a job and move to self-sufficiency.
I know that the Clock Tower project in Ludlow is specifically an elderly, housing residence project. But do you think that projects like that could be used in this way to alleviate a little bit of the shelter issue?
Well, I wouldn't call somebody who's 56 years old elderly, so it's over 55 housing
I'm
now.
near there, and I feel that way, so maybe I'm just talking about myself.
Yeah,
it's okay.
You're still in your 30s. So.
Wait until your knees stop working.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the Ludlow Mills project, which is something that the state, the public and private partnership is so essential, and it's every level of government, from the local, the state, to the federal level that's worked on the Ludlow Mills. People might not realize this, but the Ludlow Mills project and that surrounding area was the largest browns field in all of New England and had significant cleanup. But there's also a historical connection with me in those mills. That's the reason why my family immigrated from Portugal and Poland a little bit over 100 years ago, was to work in those mills. The clock tower is our symbol in the town of Ludlow and hasn't worked in my lifetime. And we're right at the cusp right now with the project that Wind Development is working on for that over 55 housing and also retail space there to actually get that clock working for the first time in my lifetime, which I'm really excited about, and playing a role first as a state representative and now as a state senator to help with some of that cleanup, to help with the water and sewer issues in that area, to put along a beautiful river walk right along that stretch of the Chicopee River there that borders Springfield and Wilbraham, is something that is going to revitalize that part of Ludlow. But it's also part of addressing our housing crisis and making sure that we have affordable, mixed-use, market-rate housing. Those are the goals of the projects that are in there. It is over 55 right now, but there are still other buildings on that property that can be developed into more sustainable housing that's not just over 55. And that is, some market rates, some that is subsidized. So we can have a variety of different housing options for families that desperately need it. So I'm really excited about the project. I know that the clock tower building is being worked on right now. New windows are in, and we also have some retail space going in there. We have a thriving brewery, Iron Duke Brewery, that's there. We have a lot of small businesses, things for kids that are going in there. We have space for things like Head Start that could go in there, and the Holyoke Community College Adult Learning Center that could possibly be there. I think the Ludlow Mills is a great destination and a model for our Commonwealth for a lot of our aging mill buildings that dot the riverways of Western Massachusetts.
Says this lifelong Ludlow boy. State Senator Jake Olivera. Coming up, we're going to talk about booze to go and whether or not towns should have the right to say how many liquor licenses are there. And we'll talk about your obsession with public radio when we come back.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
Almost.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We're here with State Senator Jake Olivera. As of yesterday, to-go cocktails expired. It was a pandemic endeavor to help support restaurants implemented by then Governor Charlie Baker. You were outspoken at a recent hearing about the state's now expired to-go cocktail policy. Tell us what you think about that and the latest on that debate.
Well, the extension of not just cocktails to go, but also unrestricted outdoor dining, which was also something that was very successful during the pandemic, were included in the House version of the supplemental budget bill that was passed just recently. The Senate did not include the cocktails to go provision. I filed an amendment. I withdrew it. However, I'm hopeful as negotiations are made between the House and the Senate on that bill that we can make both of those features permanent, because I think it's important to know that when you're going out to a restaurant or you're getting takeout sometimes, you know, this is for a lot of minority-owned businesses, including a lot of businesses that are owned by the Hispanic community and the Asian American community with many complex cocktails. So if you want to bring back home a margarita, which is really complex to make sometimes, or a Mai Tai with a lot of ingredients on there, you know, you should have the ability to do that, in my opinion. And so I'm hoping that both cocktails to go, outdoor dining are extended and made permanent through the supplemental budget bill. But if they aren't, there's also a bill before my committee this session that Governor Healy filed it's called the Municipal Empowerment Act, which helps our cities and towns, but also includes both of these provisions within her bill. We're working on it right now, but we need to provide financial and also bureaucratic relief to our 351 cities and towns.
We're running out of time for local liquor licenses, so you ask your pizza question, please.
Okay, so we do Pizza Quest. You might have heard it. A place that we've been saving because it's so accoladed is Casa Pizzeria. Have you eaten
in
there?
Ludlow?
In Ludlow. Have you eaten there? Is it good?
It is a 10-minute walk from my house, which
You are
is
so lucky.
definitely necessary after you have one of their delicious pizzas. But I have been there before, and I enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy so many different types of pizza places throughout Western Massachusetts, including some that are in my district, some that aren't. But I don't want to play favorites, but you got to try it because they have many different styles, not just New Haven style. They have Detroit style, Chicago style. So if you're into the different styles that are outside of even New England, you can find it at Casa Pizzeria.
Spoken like a true politician. State Senator Jake Olivera, when you came on the march for the food bank, you were one of the only other people that dressed in theme, because I was both Ken and Barbie on the march for the food bank, and you showed up and marched the first day, the Hampden County to Northampton route, in pink pants, a la Ken, and you've worn pink pants again today.
They aren't sweats today, though.
No.
They're a little bit classier than that.
Yeah,
but
you got your business clothes on. And then we talked a little bit during that march about what a big NPR fan you are and how you went on a road trip with your dad, I think, listening to NPR stations all across the country.
I actually went on it by myself. So it was after I got elected to the Senate, after campaigning for like 11 months straight. I had some time, so I got in the car and picked up literally every NPR news station that I could possibly find throughout the country. And I can tell you, even when you're in the most desolate of places like Western Kansas or the Panhandle of Texas, you can always find an NPR station. And as someone who grew up around NPR, you know, listening even in the mornings, I get goosebumps when I hear, you know, Scott Simon's voice. It reminds me of going to hockey practice with my dad as a kid, going up to UMass or one of the other arenas. And so I still get kind of goosebumps when I see it. I'm a huge fan. I walk every morning, and on my walk, most of the time, if I'm not taking phone calls, I'm listening to NPR. It's the only stations that I have programmed into my car, to everybody's chagrin, including my girlfriend. So
Can't we just listen to music? Tell us your favorite national NPR shows and your favorite local NEPM hosts. And don't say us.
Okay. Well, for me, it's something that I think on Saturday mornings a lot of us listen to. Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Yeah, we went to
I've
go see
seen
it at
twice.
Tanglewood last summer.
I saw it last summer at
surprised
Tanglewood
we didn't
as
see you
well.
there.
I know, I was in front with it, but it's my favorite kind of show. Although I really like Weekend Edition as well. Both Saturday and Sunday, I think they're both awesome. It's a little bit more laid back. But locally, I have to say, you know, as far as hosts and voice are concerned, Kari and Jerry's voice is so soothing. It like puts me in a great mood.
I tell him every time, you are the most famous voice in the entirety of Western Mass. People come in here.
Really excited to see him.
It blows their mind. They're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm meeting you in person." I had the same reaction the first time I met him. We're really lucky to work with him every day, and we're glad to have spoken with you today, State Senator Jake Olivera.
Even though I feel like we only scratched the surface, I want to talk to you about so much more. But,
Yeah.
like, you have open office hours all the time. Check out his website if you'd like to find out more about what's happening in his district and ask specific questions, because you make yourself really available, and that's appreciated.
And we'll have you on again for sure. Tomorrow on the Fabulous 413, extra bonus live music Wednesday with indie rocker Caroline Rose, who'll wrap their 2-day residency at Bombix Wednesday evening.
Plus, we'll chat with Diane and Robert Rollins of DNR Farms in Hamden about the incredibly expansive and accommodating agricultural model they've developed over the past 15 years.
And word nerd Emily Brewster, resident wordster from Merriam-Webster, will help us mark the time with retronyms, which have a direct NPR connection. You'll have to listen to that tomorrow, Senator Jake. I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.